To get on the Jedi Council, you have to be one of the best, wisest, and most powerful Jedi, right? Wrong. You remember the legendary Coleman? Yeah, all he does is get wiped out by Jango Fett in 2 shots. Then there's Koth. In his only appearance in the Clone Wars, he gets captured and humiliated by Grievous. So then he stepped down from the Jedi Council and left the Jedi Order entirely to start a family. After Order 66, Darth Vader hunted him down and destroyed Koth in a duel, and then proceeded to kill his wife and kids for good measure. Which reminds me, Anakin Skywalker technically counts as a council member, even though he wasn't granted the rank of Master. Anakin was only on the council for a matter of days, in addition to being the youngest and least experienced, so he doesn't really have that going for him. Even before Anakin joined the council, he was going down a dark path, from massacring the Tusken Raiders to executing Dooku. But the honor of being granted a seat must have gone to his head, because then he went and raided the Jedi Temple, killed numerous younglings, and ended the Order as the galaxy knew it. And on top of all of that, he became one of the most terrible and powerful Sith of all time. Anakin's obviously a bad Jedi, and definitely not a good council member. But what actually makes a good council member? Well, for starters, they need to be good Jedi. This means they must follow the light side of the Force to the best of their ability, selflessly serving others without unnecessary attachments to other things, and truly being peacekeepers for the Republic. But as far as their duties on the Council are concerned, it's important to note how long they served on the Council, and what their rank on the Council was, like Battle Master or Grand Master, for example. And of course, as leaders of the Jedi Order, we have to remember how they led the Order as a whole. Did their leadership take the Jedi in the right direction, or were they to blame for its downfall? Ki-Adi-Mundi is one such Jedi who we can blame for the corrupting of the Order. Mundi was already an incompetent, if not terrible, Jedi at the time of the Acolyte. He was one of the high-ranking Jedi who were consulted after it was revealed that there was a potential Sith on the loose. He elected to do nothing about it, even though he was seemingly aware of the ensuing cover-up that took place. In this instance, we see a few traits of Mundi that he displays throughout his entire career on the Council. We see this later on with Ki-Adi-Mundi's encounters with Anakin in particular, or when Qui-Gon tries to convince the Council that he may have encountered a Sith. Then there's his indecisiveness and unwillingness to act, unless it has to do with the droid attack on the Wookiees. Like with the Acolyte situation, even though there's the threat of darkness on the horizon, he'd rather do nothing about it. And then in other situations, his quick judgments are often misplaced. When Ahsoka was accused of the bombing of the Jedi Temple, Mundi was one of the first to condemn Ahsoka and one of the most vocal against her as well, despite holes in the evidence and other things that clouded the clearness of the case. Or when Yoda claims to be hearing voices from the past, Mundi is basically the first to begin to think Yoda's losing his marbles, which is fair to an extent, but you gotta give the benefit of the doubt to one of the most powerful and experienced Jedi of all time. Finally, and I think this is the most clear thing against him, is his strict and rigid applications of the Jedi rules and traditions without upholding the most important parts of being a Jedi. This caused him to be detached to the point of lacking compassion. The Galactic Marines, the clone battalion he led, were known as the most brutal and battle-hardened clones in the entire Grand Army of the Republic, and obviously soldiers take after their leader. This speaks volumes about Ki-Adi-Mundi in my opinion. A good Jedi General is one that cares for and loves the clones under their command. Anakin, Ahsoka, or Plo Koon are great examples of this. In contrast, Jedi Master Coleman Kcaj managed to survive Order 66. He joined the Council during the Clone Wars. He doesn't speak or do anything during the movies or the Clone Wars show, but we do have to assume that he went along with some of the Council's bad decision-making leading up to Revenge of the Sith, since he was present for all of it. It's unclear where Coleman was during Order 66, but according to an Inquisitor's list of surviving Jedi, he's still out there somewhere. If he isn't dead, he ought to be helping the rebellion or some resistance effort, and with the current content we have, it doesn't seem like he did that, which isn't a good look. Unlike Master Kcaj, Jedi Master Stass Allie did not escape Order 66. She's the Jedi who's killed on her speeder by her wingman. I mentioned this in my Ranking Jedi video, but I just can't believe how unaware she is at this moment. Apparently, she has absolutely no idea what's going on. She was on the Council for a very short amount of time, just like Anakin. Stass Allie replaced her cousin, Gallia, after Addie got thrashed by Savage Opress. So for those of you that don't know, yes, those are two different people. Star Wars is really great at making look-alike characters with no explanation. Stass Allie spent most of her time away from combat situations, which explains her lack of awareness of her troops' betrayal. Other than Geonosis, it's unclear how many campaigns she was a part of. While not unskilled at combat, she was better at diplomacy, holding positions such as leader of the Medical Corps. This is because she was one of the most skilled Force healers in the Jedi Order. She was the most prominent member of the exclusive circle of Jedi healers. But at the end of the day, there's really just not much known about her, and she barely served on the Council at all, which is why she's here. Agen Kolar fell into almost the exact same position as Stass Allie. Agen Kolar replaced Koth on the Council, and guess what? They look almost identical too. Because Koth left the Order between the events of Attack of the Clones and Revenge of the Sith, Agen Kolar only served on the Council for a short amount of time as well. Once again, there's not much known about him at all. Apparently he was a renowned duelist. However, because of this, he had become very confident in his skills, believing he could take on any opponent. This caused him to be extremely impulsive and jump into unnecessary combat situations, which is not the Jedi way at all. When Grievous attacked Coruscant, Agen Kolar and his squadron engaged the Separatists so quickly that Grievous got the opening he wanted, allowing the cyborg to capture the Chancellor. In a chance for redemption, motion, Kolar failed to stop Grievous's shuttle on the way back to the Invisible Hand. You'd think such a great fighter would at least give Palpatine a run for his money, which is why Mace Windu selected Agent Kolar to join his team, but Kolar is the first to go down against the Dark Lord. Here's an interesting thought though. Would the Clone Wars have happened at all if it weren't for Master Sifo Dyas? There's not much out there about Sifo Dyas, and what little we do know is shrouded in mystery. He was a bit of an eccentric Jedi as far as his beliefs, probably similar to the likes of Qui-Gon or his friend Dooku. As it turns out, Sifo Dyas' friendship with Dooku would come back to bite him, but I'll get to that in a second. Sifo Dyas was extremely powerful in the Force and had the special ability of foresight, being able to clearly see future events many decades away. So obviously he could see the coming war ahead, and he knew the Republic would need an army. First, he consulted the Council. They thought he was crazy. As a result, Sifo Dyas is one of the very few to be kicked off the Council. Normally this would knock his ranking down a lot, but seeing as his visions came to fruition, I can't really blame him for trying to act. However, I'm not sure if hiring cloners to make an army was the Jedi's best course of action, which is exactly what Sifo Dyas chose. His mistake was confiding in Dooku, who betrayed him to Sidious. The Sith hatched a plan to have his ship shot down over Obadiah, which allowed Sidious to take control of the production of the clones and have inhibitor chips placed in them. Now, I find it likely that Sidious would have found a way to orchestrate the Clone Wars anyway. Sifo Dyas just made it a lot easier for him. But you can't blame the guy. He was just ahead of his time. And let's be real, the Council should have had second thoughts about utilizing an army that was made by cloners hired by the Sith. Perhaps if the Council had had Jedi like Tera Sinube on the Council the whole time, things would have been different. That's because Tera Sinube specialized in crime scene investigations and solving crimes. He served on the Council for 40 years before stepping down due to concerns about the direction the Order was going. For anyone who's in tune with the light side of the Force, that was definitely the right decision. In his time after being on the Council, he focused on helping the Coruscant police. That's how he met Ahsoka to help her look for her stolen lightsaber in his only Clone Wars appearance. Sometime after, he was killed by Inquisitors and entombed in Fortress Inquisitorius. He's definitely a Jedi with better values than most, but it's unclear what he did while he was on the Council. Jocasta served on the Council at roughly the same time as Sinube, but she left to focus on her duties as head of the Jedi Archives. You probably remember her from her short appearance in Episode 2, where she tries to help Obi-Wan find Kamino, or from this Clone Wars episode, where a shape-shifting bounty hunter took her identity and stole a holocron. Yeah, she wasn't the greatest fighter, but in being Chief Librarian, she served a vital and incredibly important role to the Order. Especially in wartime, her skills proved invaluable as the Jedi tried to stay one step ahead of the Confederacy. It seems that she was more logical and level-headed than other Jedi on the Council. When Master Eno Cordova came to Coruscant talking about a vision he saw where the Jedi Order was going to fall, the Council dismissed him, but Jocasta believed him. So when Darth Vader raided the Jedi Temple, she was prepared. She secured the holocron that contained the list of all the Force-sensitive children in the galaxy and prevented Vader from taking it before he executed her. I would put her higher, but most of the important work she did was when she wasn't on the Council, so I can't legitimately say she was one of the better Council members. Whereas a master like Stacy Ten had almost all of his feats while he was on the Council. Master Ten was widely known as the greatest pilot in the Order, until Anakin came into his own. Stacy Ten participated in many battles, particularly in space, from Geonosis and the Citadel rescue to Mon Cala and Coruscant. He was a very reserved Jedi, often devoting time to meditation and reflection in an effort to improve his connection to the Force. That's an admirable task, but his quietness and reservation often pushed him away from others, and it would seem that he tended to follow in the way of Jedi like Ki-Adi-Mundi, who had adopted a strict interpretation of the Jedi Code, focusing more on rules and regulations than being compassionate and helping others. He followed suit with Mundi and Mace Windu in convicting Ahsoka upon the evidence that had been presented, opting not to trust one of their own versus the story of a random citizen. And despite being a talented war veteran, he fell to Sidious's blade right after Agent Kolar, not putting up a fight in the slightest. Stacy Ten was definitely crucial in the Republic's war effort, so he deserves some credit for that. Gallia deserves some credit too, but definitely not as a warrior. She was born on Coruscant and always surrounded by politics, so it only makes sense that she specialized in diplomacy. She began her tenure on the Council at the same time as Stacy Ten, sometime before the events of the Phantom Menace. Early on in the war, she worked behind the scenes with numerous senators and the Council to strategize for the war effort, but the times called for her to be thrust into the war effort as a Jedi General. Even so, she didn't serve much on the front lines, which is probably the only reason she survived as long as she did. When Addie and Obi-Wan encountered Maul and Savage on Florum, Savage brutally mauled her with his horns and finished her off by stabbing her with his lightsaber. Based off that, you're probably wondering why I'd put Gallia above some of the previous Jedi. Because she was born on Coruscant, she was exposed to a ton of diversity. She saw the wealth from the top levels versus the poverty of the underworld, and the various species from different backgrounds all living and coexisting with each other. In this way, she developed a much better worldview than other Jedi, who simply hadn't experienced as much as she had. As such, she brought a different perspective to the Council, advocating for overlooked peoples and worlds under siege. And on a personal level, she continued this mantra, serving alongside senators like Bail Organa that frequently organized mercy missions and the like. Sure, being a skilled warrior is part of being a Jedi, but that's hardly the whole picture. Gallia did a much better job representing the light side of the Force through her humanitarian efforts than other Jedi Jedi that preferred to hide away in the temple or fight on distant worlds. Even Piell was one such Jedi who may have focused on the war too much. Luckily, he still retained a kind heart and a desire to serve others. Master Piell was one of the few Jedi who saw frequent action before the Phantom Menace. He lost his eye fighting terrorists while on a campaign on his home world. Naturally, when the Clone Wars rolled around, he was trusted with many important missions and sensitive information, which is how he and his subordinate Captain Tarkin each had half of the coordinates for the coveted Nexus trade route. This made them a prime target for the Separatists, who eventually captured them and imprisoned the pair at the Citadel, as shown in Season 4 of the Clone Wars. For some reason, after Obi-Wan and Anakin broke him out of prison, Master Piell was caught off guard while fighting crab droids and died after a wolf bit him on the neck. While his death is pretty dumb and unfortunate, this can partially be attributed to the fact that the wolves came out of nowhere, and that he was coming off of weeks being held in prison, enduring starvation and torture. Depa Billaba is probably a much better Jedi than Even Piell, considering she was the master of Caleb Dune, who would go on to be Kanan Jarrus. Trained by the legendary Mace Windu, Depa Billaba ascended to the Council just a decade before the events of the Phantom Menace. By virtue of her training, she was exceptionally good at lightsaber combat. She's a more balanced version of some of the Jedi I've mentioned previously. Depa could hold her own in battle while still being a skilled diplomat and consular. Known for her wisdom, she was always against the idea of the Jedi fighting in the war, and was appalled by the atrocities that were being committed on both sides. Master Billaba saw the irony in peacekeepers becoming generals in control of vast armies of clones. We see her exemplify what it means to be a good Jedi when she selflessly sacrifices herself to save her Padawan. When her troops turned on her at Order 66, she bravely made a final stand to buy Kanan time to escape. And a Padawan is only as good as their master. Kanan was one of the few Jedi to truly embody the light side of the Force, maintaining balance between loving others and having attachments. There's no doubt that Kanan inherited many of these good traits from Depa, and following her example, he sacrificed himself for the ones he loved, just like her. Depa served on the Council for a fairly short amount of time though, totaling to just over a decade. That's nothing compared to Jedi Master Oppo Rancisis, who had a seat on the Council for over 200 years. Oppo probably caught your eye at some point while watching the prequels, as he's easily one of the more unique looking Council members. He was a genius in military strategy and tactics, and was often seen in the Temple's private war room consulting with generals throughout the galaxy. Master Rancisis' exemplary skills even earned him a position on Republic High Command as the Council's representative. Oppo's talents in war didn't end there though. He was one of the most skilled Jedi of all time at a special ability called Battle Meditation. This was a rare Force ability that could be implemented on an absurd scale. A user would go into such a deep place of meditation in the Force that that person could influence all of the combatants on a battlefield, strengthening those on their side and increasing their reflexes, weapon accuracy, and morale, while simultaneously eroding the morale and strength of the enemy. In Legends comics, Oppo Rancisis was frequently deployed to key fronts where he could turn the tide for the Republic. At the Siege of Seleucami, he stayed in battle meditation for a period of 4 months, while the Republic and the Separatists were in a deadlock. Dooku personally sent over a dozen of the most elite assassins in the Separatist army to kill Rancisis. Even in his weakened and depleted state after coming out of meditation, Master Rancisis fought them off, but ultimately Oppo was stabbed in the back by former Jedi Sora Bulk, who was a longtime lightsaber instructor considered to be one of the best duelists in the galaxy. As a result, the Republic quickly lost at Seleucami, which obviously shows how invaluable Rancisis was to keeping the Republic's foothold on that world. Oppo Rancisis' master, Yaddle, may have been even more powerful than him though. She's the same species as Yoda, and while we don't know their origins, it's clear that they are very powerful in the Force. Yaddle spent most of her time on the Council during peacetime, and as such, she had almost no combat experience. Instead, Yaddle devoted herself to teaching younglings. Yaddle specifically loved bringing out the best traits a Jedi should have in her initiates: compassion, love, patience, and forgiveness. She practiced what she preached, as she possessed each of these qualities. As it turns out, Yaddle had a lot in common with people like Dooku and Qui-Gon. In her centuries of service on the Council, she had noticed some of the complacency and corruption that was creeping in. She respected Qui-Gon and Dooku's decisions not to accept seats on the Council, as both men didn't want to be a part given their more radical views. She agreed with both of them on that, and was often critical of the Council's decisions as a group. This caused her to resign from her seat on the Council, unwilling to be a part of their disastrous decision-making any longer. Without her Council duties to attend to, Yaddle spent more extended time with her remaining friend, Dooku. Yaddle was intelligent and observant enough to notice Dooku's slip towards the dark side. Unfortunately, on one particular day, her suspicions got the better of her. Yaddle saw Dooku leaving the temple in an unidentified craft. Upon following him, she found Dooku and Sidious in the middle of a meeting in the factory on Coruscant. Even at this point, knowing that he was serving the Dark Lord of the Sith, she still offered redemption to Dooku, hoping that he would turn from the error of his ways, but he was already too far gone. Yaddle wasn't the greatest fighter to begin with, and with Lord Tyrannus being one of the best duelists ever, it wasn't really a contest. I've been trying to improve my dueling skills too, which is why I partnered with N-Sabers, the sponsor of this video. N-Sabers has the best budget lightsabers out there, and with their holiday sale, it's never been easier to get your first lightsaber. You can can get a quality saber just like this one for less than $100. And if you use code Eli at checkout, you'll get an additional 7% off. But don't take it from me, go check them out with the link in the description and pinned comment. Make sure to use that link when you buy, as it directly supports me and the channel. Another council member who served for nearly 200 years at the same time as Yaddle is Master Yareel Poof. A lot of you probably get confused when you see this guy. Poof looks very similar to the Kaminoans, but he isn't actually one. You see, Poof was created for the Phantom Menace. Then in the concept art for episode 2, the Kaminoans happened to look almost identical to him. The solution? Write a story about how he disappeared on a mission out in wild space at some point between the two movies. Now personally, I prefer his Legends death better. As you may have noticed, I'm focusing on canon events for this ranking, but I will fill in some details for the lesser known Jedi using Legends content as well. Honestly, because of that, this ranking is going to end up being somewhat subjective. It's just for fun at the end of the day, and if you disagree with anything, you can let me know in the comments. But basically it went down like this. An insurgent group planned to strike the Republic on key worlds. The group possessed a special artifact called the Infant of Shaak, which if destroyed close enough to a planet's core, could rip apart an entire world. These insurgents planned to detonate the Infant of Shaak next to Coruscant's main power generator for the entire planet, which would in effect wipe out trillions of people in the heart of the Republic. Poof easily dispatched the insurgent group under General Korba and used all of his power to contain the force energy unleashed by the artifact, which saved all of Coruscant at the cost of his own life. So while a guy like Grand Moff Tarkin might have the highest kill count in all of Star Wars, Yareel Poof effectively saved the most people ever. In addition to that amazing feat, Yareel Poof also had some insane force powers. He was known to be the best Jedi of all at Jedi mind tricks, seducing even the strongest minded. But even more crazy than that was his ability to influence even Force users' minds to make himself appear invisible to them. On stronger Jedi or Sith, this would only mess with their mind or temporarily blur their vision. But for everyone else, Yareel Poof could completely disappear from their vision. And if that wasn't enough, he can also conjure up force illusions of pretty much anything, either to distract or scare his opponents. So while his fighting skills may not have been up to par with other Jedi, Yareel had plenty of other tactics in his bag to give himself an advantage. Now right before we get to the top 5, at number 6, I've got Shaak Ti. She doesn't really have any of the amazing powers or feats that some of the previous council members had that I've talked about earlier. What she does have is a kind and loving heart. Wow, that might even be too corny for my standards. What I really mean is that Shaak Ti displays a lot of traits that make an excellent Jedi. Therefore, that makes her an even better council member. She came onto the council after Yaddle's retirement, and thus spent her time on the council primarily during the Clone Wars. She was stationed on Kamino, overseeing the production and training of each new batch of clones. This is where we get to see Shaak Ti as a person. She's aware that she has to maintain strict standards. She's helping train an army after all, but she's still loving and compassionate with each clone, seeing them as individuals with different personalities. Contrary to the Kaminoans, Shaak Ti typically talks to clones using their nicknames, rather than their numerical designation. And in the case of Domino Squad, she's willing to be patient and give second chances. She frequently lobbied on their behalf against the more rigorous trainers and the Kaminoans. Clearly, Shaak Ti also had a strong sense of justice, as she made sure that Fives escaped a memory wipe or death in order to tell his story to the Chancellor. Nobody could have known what happened next. Even so, she didn't really believe that Fives would attempt to assassinate Palpatine. Because of the circumstances of Fives' death and the revelation that the clone army came from potentially sinister origins, Shaak Ti also lobbied for further investigation, which the council neglected to pursue after Plo Koon's mission to Obadiah. As far as her death, well, Master T has died in so many different ways in Star Wars media. In my opinion, it seems as though she died at the hands of Darth Vader as he raided the Jedi Temple. Shaak Ti was deep in meditation when Anakin entered the room and stabbed her in the back. Honestly, I can't really blame her for that one. She probably just thought a friend was coming in, not a former friend masking his presence as a Sith. While her fighting abilities may have been lacking, Jedi Master Kit Fisto is the perfect balance between being a true light side user and still being an elite swordsman. Arguably one of the Order's best duelists of all time, Kit was adept at using 1 or 2 lightsabers in combat, and we see that on display with his unique fighting style when he dueled General Grievous. He had no trouble facing Grievous' 4 lightsabers and even cut his legs off. Even without his lightsabers though, Master Fisto was a great warrior. He nearly bested Rift Tamsin in hand-to-hand combat, with Tamsin being much stronger and physically larger than Fisto, not to mention being underwater, which was Tamsin's home turf. With all of that skill, it was logical that he would be chosen to be part of the task force to arrest the Chancellor. Kit did last longer than Agent Kolar and Saesee Tiin, but not by much. Some would attribute this to Palpatine's Force Screen, which may have disoriented the Jedi, making them easy targets for him. I think my favorite thing about Kit is his easygoing personality. reality. There's a lot of great Jedi that have all the right characteristics a Jedi should have, but they take themselves too seriously. Master Fisto was never afraid to let go and have a laugh, and enjoy banter with his comrades, whether it was his Padawan or other Jedi like Anakin and Ahsoka. But when the situation called for it, he could quickly switch up into a super intense, focused version of himself. Jedi Master Mace Windu is one such Jedi who definitely took himself too seriously. Mace was an incredibly dedicated Jedi. He lived by the book and sought to follow the Jedi Code and its rules down to the letter. In doing so though, Mace had some serious blind spots. One in particular being his attachment to the Republic. Through his years on the Council, it seems that he'd come to believe that the Jedi Order's primary purpose was to serve the Republic and the Senate. So when it came to wartime, that just meant doing whatever it took to win the war. That's just simply not right. His dedication to the rules also caused him to be arrogant towards those who weren't as similar to him, or even blatantly pushing them away. We see this in his reactions with peers like Qui-Gon or Dooku, or even a younger Jedi like Anakin Skywalker. And of course, most importantly, Mace was blind to the corruption of the institution he held so dear. Which is funny considering that he found that to be one of the most important issues facing the Order. But he went about preventing that corruption in all the wrong ways, such as closing himself off from Anakin. With all of that in mind, you're definitely wondering why I put Mace so high up on the list. You might disagree with me, but think about this for a minute. Sure, Mace was a senior council member and a leader during some of the council's worst decision-making, but in more situations than not, he was right. The biggest moment we all remember is when he didn't let Anakin join his task force. But we gotta remember, he was right in not trusting Anakin. Anakin was obviously conflicted and was close with Palpatine. Mace also knew that Sidious needed to be killed, whereas Anakin tried to advocate otherwise. Oftentimes, we like to vilify Mace, because it's easy. His bluntness and rigid demeanor makes him look like a dick to other characters. He's shown as not caring about others or their emotions. To that I say, look at the Clone Wars show. He cares for his troopers on Ryloth and actually treats Jar Jar Binks much better than Qui-Gon ever did. Speaking of which, in the Clone Wars show, he's often used as a scapegoat. In the movies, Mace is a type representing some of the Order's failures. He's a product of a bad environment cultivated by peacetime. But even despite all of his flaws, the Jedi Order is still a good institution right up until the very end, just like Mace. Moving into the top 3, I've got a hot take ranking. You guys all know I love to glaze Obi-Wan. After all, he's the best Jedi of all time in my opinion, if you remember from when I ranked every Jedi. The thing is, for this video, we're talking about ranking Jedi as council members, and Obi-Wan didn't serve on the council for long at all. In fact, he was only appointed to his position on the council just over 2 years before the events of Revenge of the Sith. That period of time was an extremely important time to be on the council, but still, not much time at all in the grand scheme of things. While on the council, he still fought on the battlefront while weighing in on the council's decisions. He fought Dooku, Maul, and Savage, killed Grievous, survived Order 66, and defeated Darth Vader at the peak of his powers. As far as his role on the political side of the council, it's unclear what Obi-Wan did. Obviously, he played some part in the council's plan to make Anakin spy on the Chancellor, which proved to be disastrous. Even so, he tried to be the bridge between the rest of the council and Anakin, which was good on his part. But honestly, given Obi-Wan's lack of experience on the council, his say in things wasn't very important. For example, when Anakin and Obi-Wan went to the Pikes and discovered that Dooku was behind the creation of the clone army, all Obi-Wan could do was present their findings. Ultimately, even after Mace Windu shared his doubts about covering everything up, it was Grandmaster Yoda who gave the final verdict. Yoda is such a mixed bag. He is far and away the oldest Jedi at over 800 years old, and served the longest on the council in the prequel era, for nearly 400 years. With all of that age and experience, he had immense knowledge of the Force and how it worked. He's trained more Jedi than anyone, including notable names like Dooku and Mace Windu. But here's the thing, as Grand Master and leader of the Council, wasn't the Jedi Order's downfall in large part due to Yoda's shortcomings? Well, yes and no. I think a lot of times we forget to give Sidious credit for the way he slowly influenced the Council from his spot in the Senate for so many years, clouding the Force and the Jedi's judgment. Palpatine was a culmination of thousands of years of work by the Sith, from Darth Bane all the way down to Plagueis, and now him. So in the midst of a war in which Sidious controlled both sides, the Jedi had a lot to deal with. The darkness was quite literally everywhere. We also have to remember that for centuries, Yoda simply had to lead the Order through peacetime. It seems that he did a good job at that, except for perhaps allowing the Order to become complacent. Granted, that shouldn't really be an excuse for him, but let's be honest. How is someone with almost zero experience dealing with Sith or wartime duties going to adapt to that job and do it well? Almost no one. Fans tend to forget that for the most part, Yoda made the correct, logical decisions for the Order during the Clone Wars. Unlike most, Yoda seemed to have an understanding that the Clone Wars were going to be the beginning of the end for the Order anyway. It seemed to be destiny, fated by the Force for reasons unknown. And Yoda almost successfully led the Council through the war anyway. The main thing I have against Yoda is that while he was leader, he either failed to recognize or elected not to fix some of the culture issues in the Jedi Order. And I think the answer is that Yoda chose not to fix that environment, given this detail in the Revenge of the Sith novelization, where Sidious laughs at Yoda, telling him that while the Jedi stayed exactly the same since the death of Darth Bane, the Sith completely evolved. And honestly, why should the Jedi change? Yoda didn't become the leader of the Council until long after Bane, so not all of the blame falls solely on his shoulders. Nevertheless, the fact that he chose to do nothing about that keeps him from being the best Jedi to ever serve on the Council. That title goes to Jedi Master Plo Koon. I'm sure none of you were expecting this ranking for him, but once you hear what I've got to say, I think you'll agree with me. Plo Koon was another old and experienced Jedi who lived upwards of 400 years. It's clear from instances like Ahsoka's trial before the Council that Plo was not afraid to be a dissenting vote. Whether it was caring for Ahsoka, who he found as a child, or his troops in the Wolf Pack, Plo didn't discriminate. I think out of all the Council members, he may be the closest to truly following the light side of the Force in this regard. While we never really see him on screen in combat situations, Master Plo was definitely one of the strongest Jedi on the Council too. He had mastered a unique ability called Electric Judgment, which is when a light side user is able to use Force Lightning, sending yellow bolts at opponents. I doubt Plo would have died at Order 66 had he not been in a starfighter, but who knows, maybe he's still alive somewhere. I for one wouldn't be mad to get to see more Plo Koon content. If you love Master Plo, you should check out the video on the screen. I know you'll love it.